Untitled Church friends and family, good evening. My name is Tim, and welcome to our midweek online gathering. I've got Paul Taylor with us. Hello, Paul.
Hello, bro. How are you?
I'm very good. Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
And Sia.
Hey, what's up?
Thanks for being here, bud.
Yeah, it's what I do.
Yep.
It's a joke.
If you guys had tuned in on Sunday, either to our morning stream or our evening stream, you'll recognize both Paul and Sia. They both preached. But for the purposes of the whole church going in the right direction, we're going to be chatting through, Paul, your preach in the morning.
Sia would lead them in the wrong direction.
Yeah, he might. So what we're going to be doing tonight is we're just going to chat through the Sunday service in a little bit more detail, and then we'll give you some discussion questions for life groups so that you guys can chat it through in your groups at home. But very briefly, Paul, you went through 3 points. And those points were reasons for sharing the gospel, because the gospel is so worthy of being shared, but some of us still need some help in getting there. And so you had 3 big reasons why every believer should be sharing the gospel, because it is every believer's mandate.
Yep.
And so I want to quickly run through those. The first one was that, one is because I said so, as in Jesus said so, because it's a command from him. There's an obedience factor here that we have to give consideration. The second reason that you said was that it's because Jesus will be with us. And then the third reason you said also is that because I want to. Yes, that's what my note says. It's because Jesus makes us want to do this. And so he's the one that changes our hearts in it. But I really want to spend a bit of time on point 1, because this is not one that we're always completely comfortable with.
Yeah.
And so if we've got listeners from Sunday or listeners tonight who are maybe not living completely submitted to God, this one's going to jump up and punch us in the face because it is a command of God. And so it's going, hey, just obey. The other 2 points can get quite encouraging and we can find some comfort in them, but it doesn't mean we can't focus on point 1. And so I really want to spend a little bit of time there. And what I want to ask you guys is that first of all, we need to be aware that we are being disobedient, or we're not actually falling in line with what Jesus has asked us to do. And so how do we really assess that? Like, what questions can we ask ourselves? How do we look at ourselves in relation to our obedience to Jesus?
What questions do we ask ourselves? It's probably worth saying that if point 1, because Jesus said so, does feel very demotivating compared to point 2, I'll be with you, and point 3, I can actually make you want to, then we're probably not going to figure out how to be obedient to him anyway. Here's why. I think Jesus offering us the opportunity to have someone lead us and command us is one of the kindest things he offers us. My human heart tends to, we have these competing things inside us. Yes, we want to be free, and most of us kind of resonate with that one the most. We know that we desire freedom, the get out of school. Okay, then when I have a car and I can go places, then when I have a salary and I can save for things, and like we think all we want is freedom, but the truth is we have an equal and opposite force at work inside us, which is that we long for the safety and protection and sort of childlike opportunity to say, no, someone else is ultimately responsible. And so we seek out slavery for ourselves all the time. That may sound a bit radical.
That's a concept.
But whether it's in appointing someone a sort of influencer in our lives, the way she dresses, the way he speaks, whatever, if it's appointing a brand as some kind of big voice in our lives, or any sort of force in society, pop culture, we're forever enslaving ourselves to that stuff. And if it's not that, then it might be sort of economic forces, the desire to get ahead. And even if you're not quite prepared to say, I sort of declare allegiance to outside forces, and I would argue we really all do. We're sort of human beings are quite good at liberation, but they're very good at maintaining liberty. We're forever going, okay, I'm done with that, bust out to the next thing, and then we're just as stuck in new things as we were before. And the reason is that even if we're maybe not subject to forces outside ourselves, we are 100% subject to forces inside ourselves. I am a slave to my desires. I am a human being is Abraham Maslow described us as perpetually wanting beings. Like, we just want stuff all the time. Enough is never enough. And so we are finding ourselves, we're volunteering for slavery all the time. And none of those other things, no person, no religious leader even, no brand, no pop culture force, no desire inside yourself is worthy of that allegiance. They can't be trusted with that obedience. So when Jesus comes along and says, no, the thing inside you that's equally wanted freedom and wanted to swear allegiance to something, I can satisfy both of those because I can be trusted if you fully submit to me to lead you into freedom. So when Jesus says it's my way or the highway, that's great news because actually the highway sucks. The highway, when it's left up to me, always ends me up in slavery again. So I know that's a bit of an out there concept and might not immediately resonate. But one of the first questions I should ask myself when there's a conversation about obedience to God is, do I really believe that obedience to Him is better than obedience to the other stuff? Because don't make the mistake of thinking it's obedience to Him or not obedience to other stuff. You're choosing what you're obeying. You're always obeying something. And obeying Jesus is a trustworthy, reliable route to actual freedom.
Sure. That's really good, Paula. Yeah. Sia, I'd like to ask you a similar question. Slightly different than it. Probably helping us along here. And what I'll ask you is, how do I learn to surrender? Or how do I learn to obey Jesus, not just in sharing the gospel, but in everyday life? What does that look like to learn how to surrender to Him?
So I'll start first with like my own, or actually just start my own experiences as I kind of walked a bit of a journey with that. And I just want to point to the scripture that says, pick up your cross daily. And I think that way of living became a rhythm for me. But it was because of, like, I got to a point where I wasn't really experiencing or living under the beauty of the gospel and its power as much as I would like to believe that I do now. So the stuff that I was doing was like work, obligation, came out of my own capacity, my own strength, and that stuff tires me out. Like it has
like a follow the rules type.
Yeah, like just do this stuff. But then I read a little thesis thing that Ross sent me a while ago about the gospel. And something in me while I was reading that kind of led me or convicted me to look at the gospel again. And that scripture of pick up your cross daily, for me kind of speaks to look at the goodness of Jesus at the start of the day, or however you want to look at it, but every single day, look at Jesus. And then let that govern the way that you choose to live. It has to be very intentional, because I need to be very intentional in how I look at Jesus, very deep and intimately look into His eyes. And then from that position, let that then flow into the stuff that I then choose to do. Whether it's picking where I want to work or what career I want, it's the same thing. What kind of people I want around me, how to handle my money. The starting position is I'm going to look at the beauty of the gospel and then let that lead me in the way that I am then to live. And maybe Paul can help me with some practicals. Or not.
That is totally the wrong way around. I'm not the practical guy. I'm the guy that freewheels in philosophy and theory. I will, speaking of sort of freewheeling though, so to pick up your cross daily that's exactly the right scripture to quote for this kind of talk. And a cross is an instrument of your own execution. So that instruction, every day, pick up the instrument of your own execution, the thing that will kill you, and remind yourself daily of how dead you are. It can sound quite morbid, but it reminds me of, I've had the opportunity to skydive and bungee jump in my life. And that's just mad. Okay, crazy experience. I remember going on this road trip down to the PE area to jump off the Blowcrans River Bridge. And we were young, full of beans, instructors from Spirit of Adventure. We thought we could, do anything. And we had spent all of our lives just coaching, feeble young people into what had become very, normal for us. Abseil down the damn wall, ho-hum, and then we go to this thing. We set a sign in the day before, and we look at the images of these people, jumping off the bridge. It just looks amazing. I've had similar experiences when I've seen people cross the line at Comrades. You look at that end result, and you're like, that looks amazing. I really want to have that. Then we check into the place we were staying that night. The next morning, we woke up, and we were not young, full of beans, road trippers. There was silence in the home, and then we get in the car now, doing what had been a quick trip from there to PE the night before was now a marathon driving towards the bridge to do the jump. And there's this huge thing just growing massive inside every one of our minds, this big, the jump is coming. And then you get there and you walk on this ridiculous gantry underneath the roadway that's made out of mesh, so you can see between your feet the 230 meters to the floor, whatever massive distance. And you get to the top of the bridge, and now everything inside yourself is saying, like, just hold on to something solid. Like, don't let these idiots with the ropes anywhere near you. You know? Like, forget about that damn wall back in Shogweli and all the stuff we thought we were so brave about, like crying like children, you know. And you eventually get kitted up when it's your turn, and you go and stand at the edge of the bridge. And it's not like, oh, this might be what suicide would feel like. It's like, they want me to commit suicide now. I have to like voluntarily kill myself. And everything in your sort of physiology and instincts is telling you how to save your own life at that moment. And for, you know, when Jesus looked at the instrument of his execution, we're told that it was for the joy set before him that he endured it. And then every morning when we wake up and carry our cross, I suspect the same logic applies for the joy that's set before you. And so I'm standing on the edge of this bridge going, I don't want to die. And everything inside me that doesn't want to die is doing the dirty on me. I've paid my money. I want to jump off the bridge, but like 99% of me doesn't want to jump off the bridge, and is doing its best to connect me back to the solid ground. And there's a point that comes where you have to say, stop now, like, and put to death that thing inside you that wants to live and wants to take back control and certainty. And in my case, in that moment, I had to put my faith in with the bungee jump, the ropes, and the setup.
Yeah.
And that's an incredible experience to go through, to figure out what it feels like to put to death a big part of yourself, and say, no, I won't listen to you. And then you take that step, and the end results this incredible feeling of true freedom. You've overcome it. You've got the thing, the life that was available beforehand, and you're free of that great big voice that was inside every one of our minds on the drive there. And you can imagine how much joy we had on the drive, back to PE after that. Now, that's actually flimsy compared to the experience of true obedience to Jesus, the bungee jump of that, the rush of that, the going like, I'm going to put some stuff to death every day and do the crucifixion of those desires that's necessary for the joy that's set before, for the absolute freedom that's set before.
Yeah. That's so good. I as I was listening to you yesterday, Paul, I was kind of thinking of the whole slaves and children thing, because Scripture very much says we were slaves. So everything like you've just said, in that we have to obey something. It's wired in us to, if we don't follow Jesus, then chances are sin's going to click its fingers and we're going to go absolutely. And yet, Scripture makes the very clear difference here that we were slaves and now we're children. And even in that, the lens of obedience changes. Now it's not something that we have to, where we're slaves to sin, and we almost don't have a choice until we come to that moment of Jesus and he sets us free. We don't really have a choice. Once we're children, there is a choice, but now, as much as it's instruction from Jesus, it's now done in relationship and out of love. And that's why I love what you had to say earlier in that, like, so often it's just taking a look at that gospel again. Look at who Jesus is, like, fall deeper in love with him, and suddenly the commands don't feel like a burden, And then on top of that, I love what you say yesterday, Paul, that there's almost a promise attached to this, like that trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding.
Submit to him, and make your path straight.
And he makes your path straight. He will make it plain, not necessarily in the moment, but as you go on the process of submitting, then he's the one that straightens your paths in this thing, which is so good.
Yeah, that's good.
I want to swiftly move on to point 2. And the reason that you put quite plainly, Paul, is that the reason we want to share the gospel, the reason we want to share Jesus with other people is that he is with us. And so often, this is the part I think that subconsciously we're aware of, but doesn't really play a role. We kind of tend to forget that Jesus is standing alongside us, that he's also working in a person's heart when we're sharing his message with them. We sometimes our emotions would tell us we're alone in that moment. Our emotions would tell us we're doing this in our own strength, and we have to manufacture an outcome. Yeah. But it's not the truth. Yeah. Jesus is there with us all the time. And so can we unpack that? What does it mean? And I'd like to make it personal. What does it mean for you, Paul? What does it mean for you, Sia, to know that Jesus is with you as you do this?
I've certainly had that experience that Stephen, the martyr who was stoned, he had that experience of standing before governors and like having the words he needed in that moment. And it's something that Jesus promises his disciples, that even when you're taken before kings or whoever, you'll get the words you need in the moment. I've often had that experience. It might sound, because we do a bit of talking for a living, it might sound hard to believe, but totally there are moments where you're confronted with something, and so often this is when you have been willing to just take that small step towards some pain or towards some of the stuff that we normally cross over the road and walk as far away from as possible. But you don't have to be a genius to do that. You just have to sort of stumble into a moment. That's all that's required. And I've had that experience of just having the right words to say. I can think of times when I've randomly turned up. There's a story of some people who own a car repair garage, and I turned up at their place of work. I've only been there 3 times ever in my life, and out of those 3 times, 2 times were times that I didn't need to be there, but I kind of had this inkling, and I was in Pinetown, and I turned up at the moment where they're like about to get divorced, and they're like, "Flap, the pastor's here," and then you're sitting there with these 2 people at loggerheads going, "I have no idea what to say. I'm not cleverer than them," and then the words come. Another experience I've had just recently is. And Kloof, the amazing man who is JJ, who is our worship leader, he's also run Alpha recently for the whole church. He's an incredible guy. He just came onto staff part-time. He also does some other wonderful things in the world. But that conversation was really interesting, bro, because Kloof needed someone to take hold of worship. And that's such a difficult thing to ask of someone. I know ministry might sound from a distance like, "Oh, working for the church, how cool!" Like, it's like offering someone the poison chalice. Don't do that lightly, because I know how much of just a challenge it can be and how costly it can be. And I remember the experience of one Sunday just feeling like, "No, this is absolutely right." Starting to sort of half stumble towards, "Would you consider this?" And him looking at me funny going, "You won't believe, like, my wife just had this dream, I just had that prophetic word, this thing just happened at work," and it kind of, just the synergy of the whole thing, and him then being able to really step into the thing he was called for in his life. And that's the story of most people who I've actually ever sort of hired or employed in my role at Olive Tree. It's just when there's been this like conspiracy going on behind the scenes. It's the word Nat's used in her testimony, this kind of conspiracy of God. And so as much as it's amazing to work with Jesus, it's also just worth mentioning how totally pointless it is to work without him.
Yeah, that's good.
Like, if you're trying to share the gospel, if you're trying to convince people of spiritual truths, it is impossible to do unless their spiritual eyes are opened. So the thing we're busy doing here is not just fancy arguments or great sales pitches. That wouldn't work. That's a dwarf place to start, because I'm trying to create some kind of spiritual revelation moment in someone who doesn't yet have the apparatus to see the thing I'm busy telling them about, unless I've spent some time in prayer, or unless I am able to tuck into something that Jesus was already up to. Then it goes easily. But it's not like it's harder without Jesus. It's not worth doing without Jesus.
Yeah, impossible. Yeah. That's so good, Paul. And I think what I love is that when we really get this in our hearts, the fact that Jesus is with us as we do it, it changes the lens from possibly being something that's a little bit daunting and a little bit fearful to something that's actually a bit more full of adventure and a bit more exciting. And so
it's safe and it's fun and it's just enjoyable. Yeah,
100%. And I wanted to see, because I want to hear from you, Sia, on this. I mean, what would you be expecting along the road? So, I mean, you've been doing this journey for a little while now as well. I know you've got some stories. But what would your expectations be if Jesus is doing this with you, as you're reaching people, as you're praying for them, he's there? What do you expect to happen?
Yeah, that's good. So I want to just look at a story that happened to me like 5 or so years ago. That's kind of, shaped the way that I want to answer this question. So I went on a mission trip, and the guys off the cuff would have heard this, but I went on a mission trip to Western Zambia. And fast forward, we're in the village, we're evangelizing. So you basically ask for permission to go into the village, and they can say yes or no. Mm-hmm. And this village said no, we're okay. So we move on, go to the next village. And one day on our way back from one of the villages, they tried to get our attention and stopped us. And they were like, one of the ladies in the village was cursed. Someone gave her something to eat, and she ate. She got home and she couldn't move, couldn't speak, or could barely speak. She was basically lying on her death mat. Everyone is gathering around to basically like do what we can to get her into heaven, or see if this God that we have can heal her. So in that moment, now obviously we stop, jump out the car. We want to help this lady the best way they can, because we believe the gospel is beautiful and God can heal her. Now the whole village gathers around, and now they're just basically waiting for something to happen. And so in that moment, you think to yourself, God, if it's now or never, like you better do something. But there was such a weightiness of the Holy Spirit in that moment. So we led her to Christ before we prayed for her. And she very painfully, not because of it's a painful decision, but just because of what's happening in her body, accepted Christ into her life. And then we began to pray. All gathered around her and laid our hands on her and prayed for her for about 30 minutes. And then she emerges from the blanket. Now you got to imagine, everyone's eyes were like glued to the TV screen, so to speak, and as she, like you could hear a pin drop when she woke up. Sure. They were not expecting her to live any longer, because like demonic oppression is such a real thing in that part of the world. So for me, what I got from that moment is that in the far reaches of Western Zambia, God was with me. Yeah. So now, because of that experience, the authority that I now get to walk into different spaces with is the backing of heaven. Yeah. Like no one can stand against the authority of God. I get to walk into a principal's office and say, here's an idea that I think would really help us reach young people and change their lives for the better. We get to impart the gospel in this way, and them say, that sounds like a great idea, we should do that. Or I don't know, like talking to like a group of supposedly cool young people that can seem intimidating from the outside looking in. But I'm like, I have all of heaven behind me. I think you being cool is cool, but I can still walk up to you and have a conversation, genuine, build relationship, see where you are. Like, because of that experience, like because God is with me, there's a boldness in the way that I live. There's a sense of authority that I do the stuff that I get to do because of the beauty of the fact that heaven is behind me.
Yeah. So good, bud.
That just makes me think, and Timo, I know you'll ask life group questions later, but one of the most helpful, I think, questions for us to ask is, what is it in my normal way of seeing people that stops me sharing the gospel, or that puts me into a sort of, I'm on my own fear way of thinking? Because I mean, anyone would be intimidated by a group of cool teenagers. They are like the most, coolness-threatening group of people on the planet. But there'll be some sort of defaults that we tend to walk around with, and there's certain kinds of people that that put us on the defensive, or put us on our back foot. They're looking at me like this because of my race or my age or my gender, or it's because of any other number of things that make us feel intimidated or threatened by people. And then that causes us to either want to avoid them or want to somehow try to control them, And the second you're doing either of those things, you're on your race. Like, you've decided to go it alone, not with Jesus. And so what would be super helpful is just to figure out, I am probably crashing into God moments all the time. Yeah. It's not as though this stuff only happens when you pray for 10 days. It's totally worth praying for people for ages, but like, God is more keen for this to happen than you are. So he's up to stuff. So we're probably stumbling into ambushes that he's laid and conspiracies that he's created. And yet I'm walking in there going, that person scares me. That person has something I want, or whatever. And we're thinking in this sort of orphan way that assumes I'm by myself. And so just as a suggestion, it'd be great to try and unpick, what are my normal things that set me on the defensive? Yeah. Because I'm probably missing a whole lot of God moments that are hiding behind that very thing that's making me defensive.
Good. Life group leaders, I hope you've been listening. Guys, we've got one more point, and I really want to cover this before we get into our questions for life groups. But Paul, the third reason that you gave why we should really be sharing the gospel is that Jesus himself gives us the heart for that. That we might not necessarily get excited about it. Sometimes we're a bit fearful. Sometimes we want to run in the other direction. But because we are connected with Christ himself and we have him living in us, he can shift that stuff. And so he gives us a new heart. And so Jesus, by his Spirit, can change our hearts to want what he wants and be about what he is about. I really, again, would like a story or two here. But the question is that what has been your story of God changing your hearts in something that you probably didn't have the same heart as Jesus? So how does that work? How does this work for you that Jesus changes your heart?
I don't really know how it works. It's a bit of a mystery. Maybe some other people have worked this out more clearly than me. I can think of specific things in my marriage, for example, where I had preferences or assumptions or ways that I thought conflict was supposed to work, or ways that I thought money was supposed to work, or ways that I thought time was supposed to be spent, and Bern arrived with needs in this direction, and I arrived with needs in that direction, and it was clash after clash. And that moment, because in your marriage you have to die to yourself just as much as in your faith, and working out that there's something required here that I don't particularly enjoy or like. And then Bern and I would both, I think, be able to say that there's just this kind of glorious, there's certain things that have just changed. Like it didn't actually end up being hard. The willingness needed to be there, I suppose. And then God has just given me a desire for stuff I didn't used to have, like the Free State. The desire for stuff that I used to, and now I'm like, love the Free State, which is where, her ancestors hail from. And that's a very sort of light version. I could also say the same about serving in the local church. There are parts of that none of us enjoy. There are people in the local church that none of us necessarily enjoy. There'll be different people, but there'll be some that you just have chemistry with and some that you don't. And I can think of times where there are people that are like, I'm sick to the back teeth of talking about this person or wondering about this person or trying to help this person in some way or trying to deal with their criticism or whatever it might be, And then just a moment. And sorry to keep coming back to it, but often in prayer, just a thing that God has been really helping me to see. Within the last 2 days, I can think of, there's a guy I ended up just praying for loads 2 days ago, who I remember saying to Bert about this guy, like, if I never saw him again, I'd be okay. And he comes to our church, but I was just like, I just don't have a natural thing. It's not in my heart. Now, you can either go, that's fine, and rationalize it and come up with reasons why he deserves that, or you can go, no, flip, that's a child of God. Of course he doesn't deserve that from me. And so I was for no split second thinking I was in the right on that. It was just the honest truth of, and then I'm sitting trying to get my kid to sleep, and the next thing I'm praying for this guy. I don't know why, but I'm praying for him. And then in that process, I suddenly have a heart for him. And I'm certainly not a shining example of this, but it does happen, even to me. So I think it can happen to others who are maybe more gentle and caring and empathetic than I am. But there are just these times where I can see, either in my marriage or in my dealing with people, where there was someone who normal human Paul would just be set on the defensive by or be repelled by, and Spirit Paul has found himself in love with these people. And I couldn't really tell you how that happens or why, but I think there's a willingness component.
Yes.
And I think there's when you're around Jesus, then he's more likely to rub off on you. And so I might not want to be with you, but I can choose to go and be with the one who does love you. And then somehow by osmosis, I end up loving you as well.
Yeah. So good. See anything to add?
Yeah. I think what you're saying, Paul, is very right. Because what can happen is that we have an experience of Jesus and the gospel, and you begin to willingly do the stuff that he's commanded and he has instructed us to do and encourage us to do. Like, you begin to live the way that Christ lived to the very best of your ability, and you look back 10 years like, when did I change? Like, when did I become this person? Or so it's almost like you can't really put your finger on how the change happens or where it happens, or this decision specifically made this thing happen differently. But the weeding out of the old person, the old version of Sia, happens in the process as I begin to live out more of the new version of Sia in Christ. But yeah, that's kind of how I like to frame it in my own life. Like, if I'm willing and available to partner with God at the things that he's doing and orchestrating and working, and because he does speak to me and say, like, ministry was a no-brainer, like he's calling me into ministry. Okay, I'll partner with him in this thing. And in that process, what will happen is the old me will begin to die as I stick very close to Jesus and what he's doing and how he's working in my life. So I think it's just like a sticking closeness to God and Jesus and wherever he's working, and just being willing and available. And then you just look back and like, who am I?
I think it's really the willingness thing. Sorry, Timo, to take any longer on this, but it's like there's some stuff that's obviously dissimilar to Jesus that's in me, that it's like, oh, no-brainer. That needs to be repented for, confessed, put to death.
Yeah.
What worries me in my life and in the lives of Christians who have had the opportunity to know well enough that I can now see this, is where there is something in me that is like a 10, maybe only 5 degrees off from what the desire of Jesus would be that's in them. And so it might be a longing for justice, which is then causing them to end up fighting for fair treatment on things that just they shouldn't be fighting for, or it might. That's just one example of many. The trouble is, when there's something in me that's actually not producing life, that's causing me to react in ways that are different from how Jesus would react, but I'm spending a fair amount of time rationalizing those reasons, those behaviors, because they're kind of linked to something that I do intrinsically believe is a good, important thing about me. People with a gift of generosity often, I find, end up pulling the strings on people with their money, like using their money to control, and then rationalizing it because but they can't really be trusted, and I do have these resources, and they create something slightly ugly. And it's so, the word is insidious, like it's so hard to spot. But the willingness thing, I think, is when I'm prepared to say, even this, Jesus, even this thing that's connected to a gift, even this thing that I hold really dear, that I think is beautiful, that I've seen occasionally cause life, even that, if you want to change it, you can change it. And allowing that sort of heart surgery to be done in areas that we tend to actually want to boast about a little bit or try and defend because we think it's a good thing. Sometimes that's where our biggest stumbling blocks end up being. The stuff that's obviously wrong is obviously wrong. It's the stuff that seems on the surface to be good that's most dangerous.
Yeah, and sorry, Tim, just to add on, because I also don't want to, just on the back of what Paul is saying, like make it seem like our journey of changing and wanting to share the gospel, wanting to look more like Christ happens by accident. Because what happens as well is that you'll identify some stuff within yourself that you need to nail to the cross, or that needs to die in the journey of sticking close to Jesus, or what he's doing, or the work that he's up to in your midst, or just responding to that little whisper that says, go do this thing. You'll identify that actually this is not who I am in Christ. This thing needs to get weeded out of my life, and I need to get chucked in the fire. So some stuff, yes, happens like by God's miracle, and you look back and like, flip, I don't even know how or when I'll stop that thing. But some stuff requires like intentionality to weed that stuff out, and a willingness to actually look at yourself intently and like, actually I've got some work to do, and I'm going to look at Jesus so he can do that work in me, but I want to get rid of this thing.
That's so good. And I think this it applies almost all across life, is that if we want our heart change, we need to be open to it, and we need to be inviting God in. It's not like he's going to say no. It very much is going, I'm on this journey, God, and I'm going to surrender my heart first and go, you get to shift this and guide this and move as we need to. Yeah. Guys, this conversation I've enjoyed so much. I hope for all of you at home who are watching that you found this helpful. The last point I want to make is that these reasons that we have, the fact that one, Jesus commands us to do this, but two, he is with us, and three, that he wants to change us as we go. These things actually can become tools in our hands. They're not just reasons for us to do this, which means depending on who we're reaching for the gospel, we can lead with one of these reasons above the others, all of them being very, very important. But if I'm going, God, I really don't want to do this right now. So the whole because I want to, I don't feel like you've changed my heart yet, but because you've asked me to, and because it's an instruction, I'm going to do it and trust that you change my heart as we go. Then you lead with that one. There might be other times where you're going, absolutely, I've got no problem obeying Jesus. I've got no problem getting involved with this crowd or speaking to this person. But God, I'm fearful, or God, I don't know what they're going to think of me. Well, then we trust, and you go, but Jesus says he'll always be with me. And you'll see him come through in the moment. And so it's taking a step of faith, and it's leading with that one. Go, Jesus, you're with me, so here we go, which is a beautiful thing. And so, guys, as you go into discussion, I've got a couple of questions for you, which we're going to quickly run through. There's been so much here. Let's try and distill it down for a little bit here. The first question I want to ask, and it's just to get discussion going, is which reason of the three that we've been discussing, which reason for sharing the gospel do you most resonate with, and why? And so let's chat through, let's encourage each other with that. I would love to go to that second question that Paul mentioned after that, and go, what is the blocker? How are you seeing people that needs to shift that will enable you to share the gospel? So how are you seeing them, or how should you be seeing people, even if you need to ask it that way?
Or potentially what kind of people or what kind of behavior in people sets you off into that slightly sort of fear response.
Yeah. And how would Jesus see them that I should be seeing them, that I can reach them? That's really good. And then step 3 is now putting this into practice. And so you would have heard a bunch of different stories and different things from Paul and from Sia. And so question 3 then is, what steps can you take to better ready yourself to share the gospel, or to better position yourself so that when the time comes and opportunity comes, you can share Jesus or share your story? And maybe that means you're resolving to practice it in life groups like Paul you're talking about in your preach. Maybe you're going to pull 1 or 2 of your friends across and go, I actually just need to practice sharing my story, or practice sharing the gospel. Maybe it means going, hey, I need to spend more time with Jesus, and I've got to look at him more, and I've got to fall deeper in love with him. But I would love you guys to prayerfully consider, what step am I going to take personally? And then you can pray for each other afterwards for those steps, that as you take them, God's going to come through for you. And that you're going to see breakthrough.
And let it be an encouragement to you. I know of various people who, on the anniversary of the day they were saved every year, they call the person that led them to the Lord and just thank them again. And I think that's a really cool practice, and potentially that might get you to start to phone some people. But one day in your life, you might be getting a bunch of calls throughout the year. Or maybe out of this life group, you will have been involved, and there won't necessarily be a call that any one of you could particularly claim credit for, but you get to be part of some people's birthday into the family of God. That is very beautiful.
Yes. Guys, thank you so much for your time. To everyone at home, enjoy the rest of your evening and your discussion together, and we'll see you next week again.